Off camera, I spent a considerable amount of time stripping the finishes off of this guitar. It was dark brown before, and given its age, I assumed it would be lacquer. As I tried to get into it, though, it was clear that somebody had actually finished over top of the original finish, and so I ended up using a lot of sandpaper and power tools to kind of go through this. After getting all the finish off, of course, I went back with some scrapers, sandpaper, sanded it to 220. So now that all the prep work is done, this wood actually appears to be something like birch. Birch for the body and then poplar for the neck. The grain pattern here is actually pretty nice. And so to give this a bit of color while still retaining kind of a vintagey vibe, I'm going to use amber shellac to actually cover the entire body. And so what I'm going to do is do the back and the sides first, do the neck, let that dry, and then I'll put a first coat on the top, see how it all looks, possibly go back with a second coat. And after that, if it feels like that's enough finish, then we'll stop there. If not, I do have a spray can of clear shellac as well. We'll just kind of keep building up coats until we see a good looking result. So I'll let that set for about 15 minutes until it's dry to the touch. Shellac is alcohol based, so it supposedly is supposed to dry pretty quickly. So I'll let this first coat dry up, flip it over, do the front side, and then evaluate whether or not I want to do more coats of amber shellac, or if I want to go and start working on the clear. Two coats in and I'm really enjoying what the color looks like. And so what I'm going to do now is just take a 320 grit sanding pad, lightly sand this to try and smooth out any imperfections. After the sanding, it looks pretty rough, but the finish is actually really quite smooth. And that's what I want. And so now what I'm going to do is just get a tack cloth to wipe off the dust. And then I'm going to try something I do when I'm doing a true oil finish, is to thin down the last coat or two that I'm doing, and then hand apply it with a blue shop towel. In this case, it'll give me, a lot of control to wipe up any areas, make sure there aren't any fat edges and drips and things. And then I'll let this sit for quite a while, and then I'll come back and actually scrape the binding. The binding here is white plastic. It doesn't look good with the shellac on it, and so I'll come back and scrape off that shellac, and then the finish of this guitar should be done. You can see I wasn't too precise about the thinning. I just took some denatured alcohol, which is the solvent in shellac. Looks like I maybe did a 50-50 ratio. And so now I'll go and wipe across the top here to hopefully do my final coat. Already I'm amazed at how fast this is drying. The shellac goes on and then gets sticky almost immediately as the solvent evaporates off. The thinned out coat has dried, and it's definitely left a shiny finish here. But I'm going to do it one more time just to see if I can even it out a little more. Finishes like these, always end up being things where I keep going back with really fine sandpaper and then putting thin coats on. But overall, I mean, from the condition that this guitar started in, I think this looks fantastic. It's got a very vintagey vibe, the way I expect it might have looked, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. but of course now, all repaired and cleaned up a little bit. So I'm going to put another one. I have just a little bit left in my cup here, and so I'll put another really thin coat on, let that dry, and then, as always, we'll just kind of see how it dries. I'm going to go one more coat. I've said that a couple times now, but I've added even more alcohol here. And so really the point now is just to use the alcohol to smooth out any remaining finish. There's barely any shellac in here at this point, and hopefully that will dry evenly. Maybe a little bit of really fine grit sandpaper, and then we'll move on to the next task. The guitar has been hang drying for about 3 days, so it should be good and cured at this point. And so now I'm going to use some combination of a razor blade and my hobby knife to go around and scrape the binding off, and it should make it look really sharp with the white plastic line going around the top. Taking a guess, I would say it was probably about an hour's worth of time to scrape the binding off, but it makes such a huge difference. Whenever people see something like this, there's always a tendency to say, well, why didn't you tape off the binding? And, as a beginner, I thought that too, but there really is no substitution for just scraping it off. It's kind of like painting houses. When you go over someone's house, you don't actually look to see where the line is for the trim. I want to, think that, okay, that's a perfect 90-degree angle, and, that looks pleasant. And guitars are actually the same way. If you look at, some production guitars, and you actually look at the hand scraped line that they do, it's not perfect, but what they're doing is going and making it smooth. And so the line exists wherever you sort of scrape it. And, so it doesn't have to be exact as much as it has to be smooth going around. And you could have seen, on the time lapse that I was going over some areas. And then when I was done, I would take actually really long strokes. And part of that was actually to smooth out this transition piece. So now I think the next step is probably to get the car polishing compounds out and try and finish up the finish with some really high grit polishes, and then I can move on to actually putting this guitar back into working mechanical shape by refretting it and making sure there aren't any other issues. As I was thinking about how to approach this, I couldn't get over thinking that using car polishing compound might be overkill. When you rubbed your hand over the top, it was pretty smooth, but it wasn't quite smooth enough. And so I took a piece of 1000 grit sandpaper and just lightly rubbed it over the top. And of course, all sandpaper is going to leave scratches. And so, as I was thinking about what I wanted to do, it occurred to me that I didn't need any more shellac material actually on here. I just needed to smooth it out some. And so something you would only do when it is a $100 guitar, I actually just took some denatured alcohol, put it on a rag, and smoothed it out. Effectively, what I did was just take the solvent that dissolves shellac, rub it over as kind of a polish, which the theory was that it would smooth it out in kind of the circles that I was rubbing it in. And it does appear that that's kind of how it worked out. And so I'm literally going to stop right here because I think the finish is done. For my first time using shellac, I think it turned out beautifully. With 1,000 grit sanding, it's a nice smooth feeling neck, and that's it. And so now that this guitar is refinished, I can move on to refretting. Thanks for watching.